Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name
Morning.
is Scott Norman. I'm with the Texas Association of Builders and appearing neutral this morning.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Appreciate the opportunity to appear before all of you. I had the pleasure of meeting, I think, almost all of you, and look forward to working with you in your capacity in this committee and others this session as we work together to try to address housing needs for our growing state. As Dr. Lonnie said, our state is rapidly growing. A little bit about us. We're the State Home Builders, Remodeler, Developer Association. We have about 10,000 members across the state, represents about 750,000 jobs and about $71.5 billion to the Texas economy annually. It's no surprise to any of you, but we have a housing problem in Texas. It's something that we are working diligently. Our association's been around for 80 years. We have 26 local home builders associations around the state. And it really comes down to a supply side problem. The two things that drive housing growth anywhere is job growth and population growth. And Texas has had that in abundance for a number of years. We've been blessed with that, bless you. And it's something that we're going to have to challenge, and a lot of that comes through this committee. This committee has immense responsibility when it comes to addressing not only land use and land development issues, but there could be legislation that ends up in here dealing with the regulatory process for both the development side and the building side. We've handed out some information that comes from our association as well as our national affiliate, the National Association of Home Builders, that details some of the issues that we're facing. I think one of the things that it's important to remember, there are those issues that government can solve, and there's those issues that are outside the control, certainly of the state government, but also local and federal government as well. But our National Association estimates that 25% of the cost of housing, and obviously this varies jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but nationally, 25% of the cost of housing is due to the regulatory burden. In that 25%, about 2/3 of it, or 16.5%, is during the development phase or getting the lots on the ground, and then the other third of that 25% or 8% or so is during the construction phase, during the actual building permitting and swinging hammers. And that is an area that we focus on a lot with the legislature, because that is an area that we can work to try to address. So much of our regulation is at the local level, whether it be city or county, but a lot of that is defined and outlawed and are outlined and created by state law. And so that's something that we'll be working with you on legislation to address some of these issues. I think it's important to remember that, especially since the pandemic, but this has been increasing for years, is the affordability challenge or housing attainability challenge we have. Nationally, it's estimated that 77% of citizens can't afford to buy a home, and that is a problem here as well in Texas. We unfortunately rank 45th among the 50 states in home ownership. We believe in home ownership, but the housing problem is not just a home ownership problem. It's additional rental units, whether they be single family or multifamily. It's in all of the above, and it's, as I said, it's a supply problem. If we can get more houses on the ground, more apartments on the ground, more housing units on the ground, you will see prices come down. But when it comes to single family development and multifamily too, it all triggers from the cost to get that lot developed, to get the infrastructure to that lot, to make sure that there's adequate water and roads and wastewater and what have you. And so those are things that are very important to us as we go forward. One of the things this committee has jurisdiction over is special purpose districts, especially MUDs, municipal utility districts. As our state grows and so much growth is occurring outside where historically it was occurring in cities over the years, much of that is now occurring in the unincorporated areas or in the extraterritorial jurisdictions. Getting water and wastewater infrastructure to these developments is crucial, and MUDs and other special purpose districts are an important tool to do that. They're a way to finance the cost of that infrastructure, get water and wastewater utilities, and drive that housing cost down so that it isn't front-loaded, but it is paid by a tax by the individuals who buy into that community. It's a way to finance over time all of that infrastructure that serves and is 100% serving the people that own those homes and that live in those neighborhoods. So that's something we're happy to talk to you about at length and something that is very important to us going forward. I know we've reached out and met our staff individually and tried to meet with all of you on this committee, but we're here as a resource and look forward to working with you, all of you, on these issues going forward.
Okay. You said 2/3 of the cost of regulatory is 25% of the cost of development.
25% is, and of that, 2/3 is during the development stage, 1/3 is during the building stage, dividing that 25% up.
So if you could name, let's say, the top 2 or 3 regulatory issues you have to deal with that actually hinder development, that because I guess you'd probably agree that time is certainly.
I would say number 1 is time delay.
And what is it that causes the time delay?
I think it's a combination. I think some of it is bureaucratic inefficiency. Some of it is, in some places, intentional delay or multiple reviewers on the same project. I know some of the extreme examples, some cities may have 20 different departments looking at a development going forward. Some of it is just a staffing issue. And it's why you'll hear people talking about, should we privatize, whether it's building inspections, or should we privatize the plan and plat review? I know some city, Dallas, had some real issues on the building permitting side, and I know they've tried to get a handle on it, Ms. Davis, and it's gotten better. And I think some of that was just staffing and antiquated bureaucracy. But you got to remember, all of these, whether it's home builders or it's just a couple trying to add a mother-in-law suite on their house on a remodel, they've got to get a permit from that jurisdiction if it's in the city, a building permit. And every day, month, week, or even year they're waiting, that's costing not only time, but the time cost of money that is driving up that project. And in what we've seen in the last few years, these delays also are exacerbated by the fact that materials cost, as you know, Mr. Chairman, are rising so rapidly. What it might have cost you to build the project a year ago is going to be an order of magnitude greater because of those material costs, labor costs, because of labor shortages, what have you. So time's the number 1. Some of it is putting requirements that maybe, in our opinion, sometimes exceed what they're authorized to do by state law, or maybe an anti-growth, trying to impose a different vision, maybe a government's vision on what is a private property decision on how to make best use of their project. That could be trying to impose larger lot sizes or larger home sizes. Again, if we're going to get more houses built, we're going to have dense subdivisions, smaller lots for certain price points. Not everyone, unfortunately, can live on 1 or 2 acres or have their mini Ponderosa out there. It would be nice, but it's not realistic. We're going to have to do some of those things. And so pushback from local governments doing those kinds of things are a few examples.
So when you go and you hand to the city your permits or your plans to, say, build 10 houses on a lot, and when you submit that, typically how long does it take before you can actually, they won't let you do anything until you get the permit, right? That's
correct. You normally, if you're in a city and you're having to subdivide and you have to file your plat application and replat the lots, like I say, it varies city to city, but some horror stories, I know 3, 4, 5 years in some instances. Now, those may be larger subdivisions that are more complicated than just 10 lots. And we understand the cities definitely have a role to make sure that the growth that occurs, meets the code requirements and those sorts of things. But in some areas, when those delays become months and even years, that's unacceptable.
Okay, let me break it down. The first thing you got to do is divide. Let's say we're going to build 10 houses on some lots. So the first thing you got to do is get approval for it to be divided, right?
That's correct.
So how long what's a range that you've seen in your experience?
Well, for that, it could take, the shortest would be a few months, I would think. You normally don't get a plat turned around if it's significant in, month 2. If you were, again, it depends on where you are, how busy is the city, how busy is the jurisdiction, but it can take some time.
Now, when you submit that, you already know what the rules are, and so you really don't submit anything. I mean, you submit something that's within the rules that's already been set, and so
that's
it still takes a minimum
what we
2
would
months.
hope, but sometimes some jurisdictions have different views on what you should do on your property.
Okay, so from 2 months, and then and you say sometimes it can take
Well, it depends on how complicated the project. Are there utilities there? Does there have to be streets realigned? Does there have to be A 10 lot might not be as complicated, but are there streets and parks and other things in that subdivision that brings in different departments in the city that are going to have their input? A lot of this, you've hired engineers and other land planners to do these plans, and they're discussing or arguing with the city's folks. Those are some of the issues, and it goes back and forth and it gets passed around. In some extreme cities, they may make you have a tree survey. They make you have a park survey. You have to contact the neighbors. Are there zoning changes that are required to change the zoning of the property? If so, that has to go through the Planning and Zoning Commission and then might have to go to the full city council. Depending on how complicated the project is and how much change is involved, it could go on. That's why it can go on and on and on. Again, we understand why a lot of this is the law, but those areas where we can streamline it, we need to work to do that.
And so then, even when you got the subdividing done, now they start building. So you submit your plans to build. What's typically a range?
Well, depending on how complicated the structures are, if you're building a simple home that you've built a bunch of times and the city's used to, that might be one thing. If you're building a more complicated multifamily project or more complicated homes, there may be some back and forth on that plan review on the homes. And then once you get your building permit, you start the building process, and you know how that goes. And we hope that building process can expedite along, because building being very sequential, you can't go to the next stage until you clear from foundation all the way to frame to finish out and all the way. And so the part during building, you hope, and some cities do a very good job, and some cities even use third-party inspectors and don't wait on government-employed inspectors. They use the private sector to show up and get inspected and turn those into the city. El Paso is a good example that does that. They're completely privatized on that area. But you hope that is an area where it can go quickly. But again, we've had examples of cities on the building permit side, which technically should be a little easier than the land planning side, where that can get delayed, and that's a problem. And then obviously as a builder, if inspectors aren't showing up, you can't go to the next stage till you clear that hurdle, and that's a huge problem.
And when you submit the plans or ask for a building permit, you're going to have an engineering stamp of some kind, right?
Maybe. There's some single-family stuff that's small that may not require an engineer, but of any scale or anything that an engineer is required, absolutely. And certainly a lot of the land stuff requires engineering.
And so on the other side, the one approving it has the same certification.
Sometimes.
Okay. And, oh, you have a question?
Yeah, I do.
Reverend, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Norman, thanks for talking about this with us. I do commercial property management. I've seen this work slowly. And are there, from your perspective, are there software and technologies that could be utilized more successfully at the local level to help streamline some of this?
Absolutely. And I hate to pick on Dallas, I think that was part of one of the things that happened. They had a software change, Ms. Davis. And so, because if you're in especially a larger jurisdiction, the scale of permit applications and that sort of thing, obviously a lot of that has been automated, or at least the handling of it has been automated, if not the review. And that's something that I think from an industry, I know our local home builders associations many times will go to the city and say, listen, we'll pay more in building permits, but keep that money in the building department and use it. If you need more staff or you need more technology, spend it there. Don't take that money and go spend it somewhere else. And so I know there's numerous examples over the years of our builders going to city governments and saying, listen, we'll agree to an increase in building permit costs, but please dedicate that money to improve your systems. But it takes, I think more than anything, it's like anything else, it takes a commitment from the city, and that's from the top, from city council, mayor, city manager's office on down to say, listen, we're going to prioritize this because, this is one of the areas where local government interfaces with citizens as much as anybody. And usually it's a tense time anyway. It's, very expensive. A home is often the most expensive thing anybody owns. You're there every day, you're sleeping there every night, and you want to get it right and you want to get it done. And a lot of times there's time constraints. You're trying to build a house because you're moving, you're trying to add on a house because your family circumstances have changed. And so people are already tense. And so dealing with the government part, which is always never sometimes that fun. Shouldn't be, but it is. And I think I want to say, I mean, we work with TML. Our local HBAs work with their local jurisdictions. Most of the cities and counties and governments in Texas want to do it right. I'm not out here trying to say they're not. It's like anything else. Some do it better than others, but I think those that are committed to making it right do a better job. Yeah. And that's something that I would hope everyone, because one of the things I didn't mention, but we've been around for 80 years as an organization and have been touting housing affordability. Ms. Davis has been listening to me for a long time, and but today there are more people and organizations paying attention to this because it's universal, the effect that everyone is feeling on how expensive housing is. It's not something that people, that was as front of mind as it is today. And I think local governments are recognizing that too, and the role that they play in addressing housing affordability needs to be addressed, just as the role the state legislature plays. There's a lot the state legislature can do, and we'll be talking about a lot of those things this session.
Do you have any ideas of how to deal with the local infrastructure that is constantly bogging down the process with arcane rules, such as in the plans and permitting process? I have heard horror stories about cities that have plans and the contractor or the homeowner doesn't have the plans, but the city's going to require that the plans be submitted. And the city has the only copy that exists. They will not let you take it.
You're talking about of your own home?
Yes, of your own home. I mean, this is absurd to me that this happens, but I have heard multiple reports of this happening. I mean,
I've heard stories of that over the years, and a lot of times you have to go hire an architect or some designer to go back and recreate plans for your
the ones
house.
that the city already has.
Right. Yeah. That's you don't hear that as much, but I have heard that story before.
Okay. The other question that I had was, do y'all see, obviously the regulatory burden is significant, but is there also a skilled worker shortage that is playing into this housing affordability?
Yeah, every input, whether it be materials inputs, land, which is a huge problem and rising in costs, and labor. Those are all things you have to build any structure, but certainly residential structures. It's something we've been working on the state level for at least 15 years, and I'll commend the legislature, and some of you in this room have done things to create more workforce opportunities. I know there's going to be more in play this session, and something we're very supportive of because we're bullish on Texas housing with all of these people moving here. We're basically in the business of building bedrooms for all of these people and coming here and living in our growing state. And so somebody's got to do that. And these jobs are there, and they're high-paying jobs. They're high-paying careers. It's not just a skill and a job. It's a career. So many people in our business started as laborers on job sites and now own multi-million-dollar companies, whether they're whatever subcontractor, supplier, what have you to our industry. These are great jobs. We're very big on CTE. Your chairman is probably as big on CTE as anybody in this building, and it's something that we've worked with him since he first got here on, but that is a huge issue for us, Representative.
Okay. Let me go with Ms. Davis first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask you one question, and as we start doing these discussions more and more, do you have an outline, or can you all put together some notion of what we could use as a universal platform for these permitting processes? We had a major issue in Dallas. I don't think it's over yet. I think we still have some real challenges. And so I hear from folks all the time where departments will come out and send an inspector, then the next person that comes out and inspects that says it doesn't work, even though they've got a letter saying it did work.
Right.
So is there can you, or have you all been able to put together a standard of must-haves that cities do, and then we can look at those cities that go to the extreme of add-ons that may not be necessary?
Kind of the best practices.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. We can get you some stuff. I know our Dallas builders have been so knee deep in this for so long. Let us pull some of that together, because I think I'll answer your question, but I'm also answering the chairman's question. Another thing that we get, and this is common, Whether you're dealing with both city and county dual jurisdiction, or even in one city,
that's from-
you may have
yeah.
two different departments tell you two different things. And the classic example is one department says, you've got to have sidewalks, on this project, around this project. And the road department says, we do not want sidewalks, absolutely, you're not going to have them.
Exactly.
Tell us what you want us to do. We cannot do both. We can't do it and not do it. And that's an extreme example. I know that's come up in some jurisdictions between cities and counties, want sidewalks, non-sidewalks. One example, or bike lanes, or what have you. But it's when you have either departments in the same jurisdiction or two jurisdictions that have oversight telling you two things and you can't do both. That's the stuff that's maddening. And you may spend a year arguing over which one do we do. We just want to know. We don't care, but tell us what to do. And that happens a lot of times, especially in the larger cities where you have different departments saying different things.
Well, one of the challenges too, which is why I want to see if there's a best practices or maybe a standard form that's universal across jurisdictions, because some of them really get pretty crazy. But the other part is communities, when they're going into older communities, the standards that they put up, their city is not even in that standard. So you find yourself getting hit with correcting the city's standards to meet what the city's current standards are, but they've been in place and they never corrected it themselves. And
Yes,
so
ma'am.
I'm just trying to figure out whether we can identify whose responsibility it would be to correct that, because builders go in and they replat and do some new piping and utilities and find that the city's out of compliance with its own rules, and yet they're going to put that expense on the developer. So I'm just wondering if we can get the basics and try to crystallize that for folks, and then we can figure out what our cities and the municipalities are doing that might be a little bit more than what we have to do, or at least understand those conditions that change for them, because
Let us get to work, and I know our friends from TML are here too, the
Okay.
cities, and we can get with them. I think there's probably some stuff some best practices we can all agree on.
Because we had some horror stories, as you well
Yes,
know.
ma'am, y'all
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, so thank
Representative Riddell?
Thank you, Chairman. In my district, we have a massive shortage of water right now, and a lot of commissioners I've got 16 counties, and a lot of commissioners have expressed concern about more development coming in. And I was going to ask you, how do y'all navigate that to make sure that our resources aren't being a lot of people are wanting to move into our district. It's a pretty great district. How do you navigate that and work with local governments to show them that you're there to be a benefit and not to do that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Representative. Well, it's certainly a challenge, and water is one of the biggest barriers to our industry going forward in certain parts of the state, certainly. Our houses don't sell if there isn't water to them. And so in areas where, like your district, where there isn't a lot of water, it's going to take the state or the development community, whoever, finding new water sources and bringing it in. One of the things we don't want to see, though, is water used as a weapon to stop development, because people are coming. And I know there are certain areas of the state who say, we don't have any water, therefore we should close the gate and nobody else should come in. We're already here. We got our piece of the pie, and you don't get any. We don't think that's realistic. Obviously, if there's not water there to be utilized, if there's going to be further growth, it's going to have to come from somewhere else. That's a bigger policy debate that this legislature's getting into this session in earnest, and something we've been in the middle of. And so we understand that there's got to be adequate water, there's got to be adequate wastewater infrastructure for projects going forward, and that's a bigger challenge in certain parts of the state than it is in others.
All right, thank you. Appreciate
Yes,
that.
sir.
Okay, thank you, Scott, and thank you for your testimony.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
The chair calls Bill Longley.
Chairman, if I could just a
Oh,
real quick
go
question.
ahead,
Something
sorry.
just popped in mind when you were talking about
Uh-oh.
infrastructure and requirements and all that kind of stuff. I sat on the school board at Northside ISD in San Antonio, fast-growing school district during the 90s. And one of the things that we relied very much on your association was to kind of give us, inventory of what was coming. Not only how many homes were going to be built, so that ultimately, we could figure out what kind of development was going to be, what kind of child was going to be coming into that neighborhood. Therefore, we could start building schools that matched the population that was coming, which meant we had to then pre-plan a bond issue, which meant we had to get a bond. The point that I'm making is we need to know, school districts need to know far in advance of what's coming into that and have the most amount of reliability on what's coming, so they can build infrastructure to it. I'm assuming utility companies, power companies, water companies have to basically do the same. So my question, after setting that up with my long explanation, how far in advance is it relatively solid on what you're going to be building in a particular area where, you know, municipalities, counties, school districts can come and look at your projections, then try to build accordingly? Because, I mean, to the point that's being made, I mean, water's tough, but that's not the only thing that's a scarce resource.
No, absolutely. And I think, it obviously depends on, thank you for the question, Representative.
Yeah.
It depends on the scale of the project. And so, you know, the larger, if you're building a master plan community that may be a 20-year build out in 10 phases and may ultimately have 15,000 homes or something, that's obviously going to take a lot of planning to be built over time. But I will say, you know, whether it's working with the utilities, which have to get the electricity out there, water, wastewater, what have you, there's a lot of planning involved. But the same with schools. I mean, our developers, especially those doing large projects, they want schools in their neighborhoods. And so they're going to be working with school districts. They many times donate land, trying to entice the districts to build schools in those neighborhoods, because that's what sells houses, is having good schools that are convenient. And so our developers, I won't say that they have 100% perfect in this, but I know that for the most part, those that are doing right are working with their school districts, trying to make sure that the growth can keep up. But it is a challenge. It's certainly a challenge for school districts, just as it's a challenge for our industry, which all the growth that we're trying to face. And, you know, one of the biggest challenges, Texas was always blessed with an abundance of land that was cheaper. We're losing that advantage. And we're seeing that in some of the stuff I handed out, our housing affordability challenges. I know I gave you a lot of information, but a lot of it is becoming less competitive. And so as we do so, we certainly don't want to be California where everybody's priced out eventually. And so those areas where the legislature can address some of these things, or we can work with our city partners here to my right to address some of these things, we need to do so to try to make sure that the advantages Texas has as a growing state, a beacon for business, all those things, that housing is available as well. Because without housing, none of this other stuff's going to happen.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that.
Yes, sir.
Looking forward to working with you.
Likewise.
Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay,